This is GBN Health. This is part 2 of our chat with Professor Carl Hennigan, Director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. And we'll do a deep dive into why the safety regulator for drugs and medicines and devices is failing to keep us safe. Moving on now to the regulator, which was set up in 2003, and the idea of regulating medicines sort of really kicked off after the thalidomide, which most people will know. I was looking earlier, about £2 billion a year is spent on the harms of drugs side effects, and it's 1 in 16 hospital admissions. Can you talk to me about some of the problems that you've highlighted, some of the areas? I know you've looked heavily at breast implants, you've looked at epilepsy drugs, and also talk about why the regulator is failing. What's happening?
Right. Well, you're right. There's been a regulatory process for about 60, 70 years, Commission on Human Medicines. Then we've had a European-wide system, European Medicines Agency. It changes of names to bring people together at certain points. But I think, there's been a growing concern for 25 years that system's been going wrong. I started out in my medicine and job as a researcher thinking I'm going to look at benefits. And actually, most of what I've done is to protect people from harms. So people will get that like thalidomide. But if you think about harms like cigarette smoking, removing cigarette smoking is a huge impact on people's health. But it took till about 1974, 20 years from when we first started to concern ourselves it causes cancer, to put warnings on the cigarette packets. So 20-year gap. Now, the first thing is to notice is there's nothing worse that I know about than cigarette smoking. Reduces your risk by about your life expectancy by about 10 years if you're a smoker of 20 cigarettes a day. Seems bound or obvious, but there was obfuscation then and prevention trying to stop people getting to the truth. Now, there's been huge problems. There's been drugs like rosiglitazone, a diabetes drug that lowered your blood sugar but increased heart failure in about 1 in every 250 people. Vioxx, a painkiller that increased heart attacks in people given it. So it reduced your pain, but actually gave tens of thousands of people heart attacks.
Have you been getting a load of spam in your email recently? What about random calls? It's really annoying, isn't it? Data brokers are out there collecting your personal information. Anything from your email, your full name, your address, and even your political affiliation. Cyber criminals can even use AI to mimic the voices of friends and family to trick people into sending them money. And it gets even worse. People out there are getting huge loans taken out in their names without even knowing about it. But don't worry, because the sponsor of this video, Incogni, can help. They reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your information is removed from their databases. Incogni continues to make sure that your data is removed automatically from the internet via repeated removal requests. So, how can you get started? Well, step 1, hit the link in the description, create an Incogni account and tell us whose data you'd like removed. Step 2, grant Incogni the right to work on your behalf. Step 3, sit back, relax, and watch Incogni work. They will update consistently so you know when your data has been removed. Incogni is risk-free for 30 days, so you can try it for yourself and you'll get a free refund if the service isn't for you. So take back your personal data today with Incogni. Use the code GBNews using the link in the description below and you'll get 60% off an annual payment plan.
Then we've got the devices. You could talk about the PIP breast implant, metal hips, huge problem. Mesh, surgical transvaginal mesh, that is probably one of the worst cases I've ever seen of an intervention that should have responded to the signals and removed almost immediately. I've been involved in a case on hormone pregnancy test, Primidos, which for about 50 to 60 years has been evidence it caused congenital malformations. What's happened is subsequent people going to the job of regulator, I think they realize there are lots of skeletons in the closet. And what they do is try to go, I'm going to kick the can down the road so that when the next person takes over, they can deal with it. What's happened is in the 20 years since the government in the Houses of Parliament looked at the MHRA and said there are systemic failings, there has been no improvement in how they operate. And it starts with stopping being defensive accepting and saying we've made errors in the past, and then and only then can you learn and move forward. And I think if they came out and said, look, we're going to do a review of the 15, 20 areas where we've made real mistakes, we haven't kept you safe, and tried to understand and apologize, and in doing so, we're now going to start learning and moving forward.
Well,
I think if they did that, we'd see a different system.
I looked at their website in detail earlier today. They say they're impartial, they say they're evidence-based, and they say they do respond to problems. Are you saying that those responses, because obviously the implants, which have been linked to cancer and other health problems, and the other drugs that, for example, have linked to abnormalities in babies and fetuses, they've been withdrawn now. So are you saying that they should never have gone on the market, or that they were withdrawn too late?
So one of the key aspects is when you innovate and bring new technologies to the market, and at this moment in time, there's many new drugs, many new devices coming to the market at speed, because the pace of technological innovation is not the problem. Once something comes on the market, what you have to do is make sure when it gets there is you do the right clinical trials to ensure it's safe and effective. However, sometimes you may have not picked up something because it may be a rarer side effect, or you didn't collect the data in the trial. That's what happened, for instance, in some of the scenarios. In some scenarios, for instance, with paroxetine, it's because the company didn't publish the results and withheld the results.
What was paroxetine? A huge issue. One of the antidepressants.
Which actually increased children's adolescent suicide, and that was withheld. So the key issue, as soon as a signal emerges, is you should take it seriously. And this has been the story of my last 20 years. I see a signal. I talk to my colleagues who are epidemiologists, pharmacologists, clinical pharmacologists, and say, do you see this signal soon? And they go, yes. We go over to the regulator and they say, well, we're going to wait a while to hopefully see what happens next. And what they do is push it out, and in some way hope for the best. None of these signals disappear, because once they're there, they actually are a very good indicator that actually things are going wrong. And in doing so, then you need to act immediately. Like the cigarette smoking, we'll get there in the end. The point is, we'll always get there. The problem is, how many people will you have harmed before you get there? And the best example of this, and I think this is a shocking example, and I'm sorry to say it's the best because it's actually a shocking example, is sodium valproate in pregnancy. The signal in the evidence was clear in 1992. That's from a significant numbers of studies showed it doubled your risk of congenital malformations, lots of issues like neurological ones. And then subsequent to that, there were problems with ADHD, autism, child developmental delays. About 10% of children born to mothers with these on sodium valproate will have congenital malformations. The important thing was this was a new drug, but actually there were alternatives. It took 22 more years till 2014 for the regulators, and this includes across Europe, this is not just the MHRA, to start to say, we've got huge problems. It took them till 2018 to do what I call is a black box warning, which basically says you shouldn't be having this in childbearing age or women or who are pregnant or who can get pregnant unless you've seen 2 neurologists, you've seen a psychologist, and the epilepsy is so bad we can't find an alternative. So that means there's only about 40 or 50 women in the country on it, where there's tens of thousands. Yeah. And so that 20-year delay has meant huge increase in congenital malformations and all sorts of development issues that could have been avoided. That's what we need to start understanding. If you want to understand how to have a health service that's fit for purpose, you start from the process of safety, not from, I've got a new technology that can improve things tomorrow.
I was reading, I think it's about 20,000 babies were born, I think, to mothers who took this and were injured by it or have malformations because of it. Can we talk a little bit about funding? On the MHRA, the regulator claims that it is not allowed, individuals working with it are not allowed any links to device manufacturers or drug manufacturers at all. And they say that their work is totally evidence-based and impartial. You have different thoughts about this.
So number one is, while they're working in the MHRA, they may not be able to do that, but the revolving doors goes, it can go from industry into the MHRA and out of the MHA and go back to industry. So that's a huge problem we face, is the revolving doors, where actually that is where you see people emerging, and then they're helping companies because they've got inside knowledge. And when they're inside, they actually have a pro-industry approach. And this is a problem. A regulator should never be an enabler, as its current MHRA said. It should be a regulator. And
so
in doing
recently, the person that runs the MHRA, the regulator, said that the job was to enable drugs to come on the market, not to regulate, or just to get them on the
correct.
market. But is
nice
it not
its
the
job
case
to be-
that 80% of its funding is actually the devices, and the drug manufacturers have to pay for their products to be regulated? So they are funded nearly totally by the industry, by drugs and device industry.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge problem. And I think what happens is then they are pro to the people who pay them. There's a sort of an issue is, if you want to keep your workforce at a certain size, you've got to do a certain job. You've got to start almost, and it's worse in the device world, because you have these notified bodies that are 100% almost funded by industry. And in effect is, the work they get will be dependent on the money they get from industry. So at some point, there's always going to be a pro-enabling approach, because otherwise, if you don't do that, you're not going to get paid. I think actually this is a really quite straightforward issue. Actually, when the drugs are sold at market, there should be a slice of that comes off with a small tax, and that money that's used feeds back into a system where it's completely conflict free, and they don't have to pay to get their drugs into the market.
Well, thank you so much. That's been a really fascinating chat. We'd like to return to this again. You're still working on it, on Trust the Evidence. And thank you very much for speaking to us today. It's been really fascinating. Okay, speak to you soon. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel.